Hello and welcome to our webinar. The title today is Depth Selection and Multi-Well Framework and the Multi-Well Framework. And the topics that we're going to be covering today are, first, we're going to talk a bit about how the track display has been redesigned. We're going to introduce a new concept, the depth selections, that it's very useful for YouTube wells. It's one of those things that is user-friendly, but also the user-friendliness is not just for visual, is not just cosmetic. It also allows you to do better modeling, which is what we want to do in YouTube wells, with YouTube wells. Another development that we have is the multi-well framework. We're going to show you how we're doing it, and hopefully we get some feedback on how to improve it. The presentation is going to be done using version 2022.001, which is an alpha version, meaning it's a testing version. We've been working very hard on improving the backend to keep it updated. And one of the things that we, also to be able to handle multi-well and all the things that we're going to show you. And as side effect, we're modifying the way we number the versions of YouTube wells, and we're going to give them the year so that it's easier to remember which, it's easy to know how old each version is. We're also expecting to have another webinar on the scripting side of this backend that we have been re-engineering. We expect to have it sometime early June, and hope to see you there too. Now let's go to the software, to YouTube wells. So this is how the software looks like if you go in. And I've already started with 2 wells. So let's start by looking at the data. Let's see how it looks like. We have gamma ray, and we can see, we have gamma ray, density, porosity, and resistivity. And we can see very clearly that there's 2 distinct formation zones that I designed it, so I know what they are. And most people would know just by looking at it. And at the top, we have some carbonates. And in the bottom, we have a sequence of layers of shale and sand, one after the other, with some noise, of course. But this is, so we have 2 formation zones. And we have another well. This is well 1. And then we have well 2, which is very similar, but not exactly the same. So let me flip them. So we have well 2 and we have well 1. You can see the carbonate section in this part is a little smaller than this part. And of course, each individual layer is different because, well, they are at different locations, but they are within the same formation. So they have similar trends. So they have similar formation zones. So the first thing that I want to do is talk about the formation zone. One of the modifications that we've done for the track display is that now we have, by default, we've added this extra track, which has the formation zones always. You can remove it if you prefer. You can add other plots. You can just remove the plot, not the track. You can do whatever you want with it, but by default, this is what you're going to see. We're going to rename it first. We're going to call it carbonate, just because I know that there's carbonate. It's carbonate. So now it's in the now it has this name, but it's going throughout the interval that we're interested. So we're going to modify this and add another formation zone, which I'm going to call shale and sand. And we're going to say that the crossing is around 1322, just to say that it's somewhere around here. And we add it, and we see that we've added another formation zone down here. And any boundary between formation zones always has a layer, a bed boundary associated to it, which is nice. You don't have to remember that you have to have it. And properties always have the possibility of changing when they go across 2 different formation zones. One is yellow, the other one's red. You can change the color if you want to, and it's going to be consistent across the different wells. So let's do that. Let's do the same thing, but for this other well. So now this well has formation zone 1, let's say that that's not formation zone 1, that's the carbonate. So now we have those options. I just modify that, and now we have a carbonate, and we see that there's a change somewhere around 1245 or something like that, and that's going to be a shale and sand, starts at 1245, somewhere in that vicinity. We say okay. Now we have the shale and sand, and we have the carbonates. Nice. We're gonna say okay. Also, if we say, well, the 1245 is probably not right, it's probably 1242, for example, I can say 1242 and just type it, and it moves immediately. And by the same token, you can also modify it just by moving the bed boundary the way we've been doing it for many years. And the idea is that you optimize locally the boundaries and the formation zones, and you keep in mind a multi-well framework in your head. Even though these two are not exactly the same, obviously they're not exactly the same. The formation zones, which are going to help us guide ourselves throughout the project, are the same, are indeed the same. So we allow that to happen. Now, something else that we're going to do here is, well, something else that I want to show you is how we have modified the track displays itself. We have some controls down here. Some of them used to be up here, but it was getting a little too crowded. So we moved them down here. We have the zoom, zoom out, and pan. We also have this one, which is show log values on cursor. And if I click on that, you can see that any log shows the values that they have at that specific measured depth. And this is pretty convenient because you can see them all at the same time. Before it was possible, but you would see only one at a time down here in the status panel. So for example, 115 is showing 114.99 down there, and then you wouldn't know anything about the others. Now you know everything about, well, you know the value at that same measured depth for all logs within the track display. Something else that we've done well, and of course that works anywhere. If you remove it here, you remove it in both. Any of these modifications are not only in all the wells, but in all the projects. So if you want to see logs always, you just have to click once, and it's going to happen in all your logs. For that's not a big deal, but you can also do that for any of the track settings. For example, if the horizontal cursor line is getting in the way, I just say don't show it, and it's just not going to show it. And next time I open YouTube Wells, it's not going to require me to go click those things. It's always there. Some people like changing the background color, so you can change it so that it's not our UT color. You can go with green or whatever color. And next time you open, this is the track title, so it's just the color that is going to show next time you open it. So if you open it again, if you close it and open it again, it's that color. Let's go back to let's change it back to the UT colors, just because they're better than green in this case. Okay, so now that we've done the selections, we've done that. Something else that we have here, another tool that we've added, is the histogram mode. If I click here, I'm going to get the mouse with a shape of a histogram, and I can select, for example, here in gamma ray in the top, I can select this section within the carbonates and see what are the values, how many incidences I have for each value. And of course, all of them are pretty low. They're between 7.7, 8.7. So really all of them are around 8. I can close this. And I'm going to do the same for the shaly sand. So I can just click and drag, and this is what I get. And you can see that it's clearly by model, which is what we were expecting here. It was designed that way. And we can see where the values are in most cases. One is centered around a little less than 40, and the other one centered around 115 or something like that. you probably noticed already that if I do it, there's a patch down here that shows the color. So there's a shade, a blue shade here, that shows you the interval that you're seeing in the histogram. And then if you close it, that goes. And even if you have multiple logs, it's going to show a histogram for each log. And it's a very easy way, a very quick way to interrogate the data that you have. Next, we're going to look at the selections. Sorry. Okay, so we have the formation zones, we have the histograms going, and we've done another. It's not too bad that I start recording just now, because one of the big thing that we're showing you is the selections, which is these three controls down here, the three orange selections. The three orange controls are to make selections, and what they do is you can just click and drag, similar to what we were doing with the histograms, and it will show you here this special plot that is called the selection plot, and you can see that it has a title, MD cell. That's the title, and these selections are going to be useful for many things. One of them is just to see where you're looking at. We're going to be able to see these things in the crossplot, which is I'm going to show you in a minute. And you're going to be able to use these sections to populate properties, or to run simulations, or to run calculations, or to it's going to work like an extension of the modeling interval that we used to have, or that we still have, but it's a little different. One of the differences is that it does not have to be connected. You can have multiple segments within the selection. And for example, if you're interested in layers with very high gamma ray, this button is to clear. You can just select here those sections that have high gamma ray, and you can say, okay, in these layers, I want to run this calculation, or I want to assign them as a certain raw class, or things like that. And then the last control that we have down here is the MD selections control, where you can have more than one selection. Right now we have this red one. You can change the color, and you can choose which one is the one you're currently selecting. So there's always like a main selection that you have. So now that I have selected the other one, I want to make another selection, and I can just say, okay, I'm interested in this section, or this section is. Something that makes it different from other approaches is that they are allowed to overlap, and that's just because in some cases some features overlap, so you are allowed to do that. In most cases, you're only going to need one, so I'm just going to stick to one, but it's up to you to decide how many you're going to use, and just make the selections any way you want. And I don't know if there's comments or questions so far. Remember, you can just unmute yourself. Now, right here, they look useful, but we're maybe not as useful as they can be. Another area where they're going to be very useful is in the crossplots. So, for example, here I have the neutron porosity versus density porosity. So in this is where you would select the source for this crossplot. So I have to make sure I have the neutron porosity in the x-axis. So we have x-axis, we have the y-axis, and some controls. So in the y-axis, I need to have the density porosity. So I have it now. And this is what it looks like, the crossplot between density porosity and neutron porosity. And it's actually from this one. So maybe it's better to keep it this way. You can see the crossplot and the plots themselves. And now if I make a selection, I'm going to hide this track, by the way. If I keep this section and I decide I want to make a selection, for example, the carbonates, I want to see where they are in the, I just make the selection, and you can see that they show here, and they show with the same color. All the other dots are just the rest of it. So it helps you go back and forth in the crossplot and the depth selection. You can always clear, and the same thing is going to happen. And you can notice that here we have the exact same controls as here. So I can start a selection over here, and let's say that I'm interested in seeing what's going on over here. So I just click and it's going to show. By the way, you can tell that whenever I click, it's not just showing the ones where I'm clicking, it's showing some extra points, and that's because the selections have a resolution. Basically, how far from the measured depth that I select, how far does it expand? And right now it's half a foot, so it's closer than some of the logs. So I can make it smaller. I can make it really small, 2 centimeters, to make sure that it's only the sections that I'm just clicking. So now if I click, it's not going to expand anymore. It's just exactly where I'm clicking. And you can see that over here it's showing the areas where I'm selecting. And you can select also, not just, you can just click, or you can just click and drag and select all the points that you think are interesting in this case. And now I have them over here in this plot also. And of course, it's interesting to see them here, but maybe I want to see them here where I have the neutron porosity and density porosity. So I can just I can add a plot for MD selections, which is this button, and you can see where those selections are. And of course, it's in this case, it's the areas where they really go, they really split in this direction. So I can get rid of this, but it makes it very clear where the points are in the cross plot compared to the track display, and I think it can be very useful. Something else that we have is we can populate properties. So in the over here we have the populate properties module that has been redesigned, and I think it's a lot simpler to use. For people that have used the previous one, probably looks not as user-friendly, or well, you don't know if it's user-friendly or not, but it of course looks different. And the main difference is that we made it vertical now instead of horizontal. So it's following the same trend as what we have here when we make selections for the source. And in the cross plots, you remember, it was also vertical. So it's always vertical. And by keeping it consistent across all the modules that we have within YouTube Wells, it's a lot easier for you to remember how to use them. So for example, if I were to, let's work with density. I can just, here are the properties that I'm going to populate. So I can say, I want to work with bulk density. And I'm going to populate it using, alas, the value from the LAS, that is row, the row comp. So the same that we have here. I'm going to use it to populate. Well, before I do that, I'm going to add here the Earth model property for density. So I can do Earth model and bulk density. And right now it's just flat. Maybe I should make the density to be a little better. Let's make it 195 to 295. And let's do the same for this one. It's right now it's completely flat. It's just the default value. And if I just say, if I say populate, you can see that it changed to what we had, which is great. And it's fine that it's basically what we used to do. So why is it interesting? Well, for example, well, one of the first, it's a lot easier to see that here. As also we made it explicit here. If you want to type an explicit value, you can say, well, I want density to be 2.2, and you can just populate, and it's going to go to 2.2 or whatever. Now, what makes it even more interesting is this thing that we have up here in the top, which is basically is the main panel that we're planning to use for all the multi-well applications, which tells you which well you're going to apply whichever operation that you're doing. In this case, is populate properties, but it can be also a calculation, it can be a simulation, it can be inversion, it can be any operation that you would do in YouTube wells that you could do for many wells. You would do it here. So and then you can constrain the depths to certain things. Before it was always modeling interval, and that's fine. but we're expanding that concept to say, for example, no constraint, to say formation zones. So for example, I can say in the formation zones, I know that the density is supposed to be, well, I can use the LAS for only for that section. And you can see that the carbonates now have the density from the row comp, and this one it stayed at 2.2, and that's good. And then you can say, well, and this one, even though it has a lot of noise, I believe that the density in the selections that I've done, it's going to be, let's say, just for the sake of it, let's say it's 2.4 or 2.5. And instead of saying that it's in the formation zone, I'm going to say that it's in the MD selection. And then I say populate, and it populates this area. Oh, because there's so many intervals, it's taking a bit longer, but it's doing it.
So while it process, just a quick question here. It's Elton, ExxonMobil here.
Yeah.
So in terms of bed boundaries, do you need to set the bed boundaries before, or it's gonna set based on the curve response, and then can you use the same bed boundaries in the future processing?
Yes, so you have to select the bed boundaries before. We have a module that will help you, and we're actually working on making that better. But we already have a module that is going to help you do that. And you could, but yeah, once you do it, it stays there for the well for all the processes. So you wouldn't have to modify them. And that's one of the big things in YouTube wells that we want to keep. We insist in saying there is one single Earth model, so that everything is petrophysically consistent across all the properties that you're working with and all the logs that you're trying to match, so that the interpretation is as consistent as possible. And one of them is, of course, the location of the bed boundaries. So yeah, once you do it, they stay. We have some modules that allow you to modify them. The inversion modules allows you to improve them, not depending on the log response and on the higher resolution logs. You would want to do that, but yeah, they are consistent across all of them.
But in this case, the bed boundaries are already preset, right?
Yes, I did preset them in this case. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sure. And now you see that now it finished, and you can see that it just goes up and down the way that we expected it, which is good. And so the things that you can use to constrain the depths are going to be the modeling interval, the selections, the formation zones like we did, or the rock class, or you can specify specific layers for each of the wells. And of course, that has to be well specific. You cannot do it for all of them because the individual layers are not the same across wells. And of course, you can do as many properties as you want, and the same applies. Something else that is convenient about this new populate properties is that we have extended it so that some properties that are not necessarily numeric can be set. So, for example, the raw class, you made the selection of in the crossplot which is probably the right place to make the selection for the raw class, and then you got this MD selection that you can see it in the tracks, and maybe you want to set the raw class depending on that. You just say raw class, and even though it's a name, it's a string, it's a character, it's not a number. Before it was not possible, now it's possible, and you just select the raw class that you would use. And the same thing can be done for the shale structure and so on, but numeric is probably the best way to illustrate this. And so these are the main things that we have done. I don't know if anybody has more comments or more questions. We are I think some of these modifications are a lot more centered in user friendliness, but like I said at the beginning, they're not limited to user friendliness. They really allow you to do modeling a lot faster, which is of course user friendliness, but it's also modeling itself. I don't know if there's anybody else wants to make a comment or questions, or if you want to make some suggestions. if you're interested in getting the newer version, you can always send us an email to the support email that we have. And we have the last stable version, and we have this beta version for if you're interested in taking a look and see how it's going. We plan to have it as a stable version, possibly by the next webinar, so by June, no later than the consortium meeting for sure. I mean, we could turn it stable much faster, but for sure by the consortium meeting where we have the official release. So I don't know if Bruce or Carlos wants to make any more comments, but this is what we have for the webinar.
No, I think maybe the comment that is pertinent here is just to say that all of these adaptations and enhancements are geared toward doing multi-well inversion, so that the main point is to actually mitigate all the tool effects and borehole effects when one does multi-well interpretation. So the idea is that rather than balancing logs or normalizing logs across many wells in the same field, the idea is that we will try to mitigate all those effects by doing inversion. And then instead of working with the logs, after that, we work with the inverted properties in the same capacity. So that has the affinity that normalizes all the well logs, all the properties. It mitigates the tool effects, mitigates the borehole effects, mitigates any effect due to caliper variations, faulty instruments, or depth matching, for instance. And then also it allows us to test whether the assumption of a layer model is appropriate or not across wells, because if we encounter that the inversion cannot minimize the differences between data and simulations, then obviously there's a problem with either the assumptions of the geometry or something else is happening. And so having the ability to quality control the misfit is actually a very good indication of whether the assumptions are being honored or not. And that is very useful when one has multi-well inversion. So everything that you're seeing today is actually all geared toward multi-well inversion. We're also working on a code that will take all of those inverted properties, layer by layer inverted properties, to do an elan type inversion, which is dependent on the assumptions about the type of shale, type of rock classes. All of that is being incorporated as we speak.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you for being here, and don't hesitate in sending us an email if you have other comments, or if you want to suggest developments or modifications. And thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next webinar.
Thank you.